One of my favorite things to do is sit around with a bunch of friends and take a look back at some of the old games that we used to play. And one of the games that comes up all the time for me and my friends is the Spongebob movie for Game Boy. I absolutely loved this game. I played it so much. They really wrung SpongeBob dry when it came to handheld ports. There's a total of 11 SpongeBob games on the Game Boy Advance, and all of them are ports of the full console games. I remember this being a big thing during this time. You'd see a commercial for an awesome game. It'd look super cool, and I'd be so excited to play it, and it would say it's releasing on all consoles and handhelds. But what they didn't tell you is that the handheld ports were very different. These ports often had major plot changes, level design changes, and it was just a much worse final product. I was personally burned by this a few times. I'm looking at you, Star Wars The Clone Wars for the DS, you son of a bitch. But every once in a while, you'd run into a gem. This gem was the SpongeBob movie. It was still different than the console version, but if you look at it as its own game, it's actually pretty good. And revisiting it 19 years later, I think it holds up pretty well. They tasked WayForward with developing the game. They would go on to do plenty of work with licensed games for the Game Boy and DS, like Barbie, Looney Tunes, Shrek, Regular Show, and yeah, even Despicable Me. You might be asking, well, how do you adapt all those shows and movies into games? You don't. But they make a lot of money, so publishing licensed games was a huge thing in the early 2000s. And I kind of miss it, to be honest. Kids these days, they're never going to know what it's like to grow up with Hotel Transylvania for the DS. Most of these were just a money grab. They'd entice the kids with their favorite shows or movies, and then the kids would bug the shit out of their parents until they finally caved and bought them a shitty handheld port. You know, at least that's what I did. When we start up the game, I'm hit with a wave of nostalgia. I can almost feel that cool summer breeze washing over me as we make our way down to the beach. My parents are sitting in the front seat, arguing, talking about getting a divorce, and that nagging feeling that, you know, maybe it is my fault. Maybe if I was a better son, then maybe they wouldn't argue so much. But the loading screen looks like the episode title card, so that's pretty cool. The first thing I noticed was that the game actually looked pretty good, especially when compared to the handheld ports that came before it. Like Legend of the Lost Spatula, my god, that game was horrifying. Now, it is another 2D side-scrolling platformer, which is to be expected when working with the limitations of the Game Boy. But the moveset and the level design, they're actually pretty cool. You play as both SpongeBob and Patrick at the same time, which is kind of cool. Each one of them contributes a unique skill. SpongeBob can shoot bubbles that clear the entire screen at the cost of a chum bucket power-up, and Patrick, well, he's just fat as shit. There isn't an attack button, so you're stuck with having to either jump on an enemy's head or charge up the dash move to take them out, which is kind of disappointing. I think it would have been kind of cool to see some kind of weapon system in the game, but what we're given works pretty well, so that's fine, I guess. The dash that you charge up to break walls and hit enemies is pretty satisfying and honestly kind of horrifying that SpongeBob would use his best friend as a meat shield like that, but hey, I mean, I guess King Neptune needs his crown. Some enemies require you to jump on their heads instead of dashing into them. And so while you're in the air, you can hold down the jump button, and Patrick will do his best Harvey Weinstein and glide. Or you can press down to perform a ground pound, which doesn't really do any extra damage or anything like that, so its combat uses are pretty much non-existent. It's really only for the platforming aspect. But overall, I think the moveset is pretty unique. It's really fun, it's really goofy, and I think that just fits perfectly into a game like this. When it comes to the level design, you can really only be so creative when working with the limitations of the Game Boy. And I think the devs did a pretty good job of keeping it fresh and interesting. There's nothing really groundbreaking here, but there's a good amount of enemy variety to keep it fresh, and the settings change depending on where you're at in the story, it's pretty cool. The levels are short, which is perfect for a handheld game. One of my biggest pet peeves are handheld games that have levels that are just way too long, especially in licensed games like these that are for kids. You should be able to play it for 5-10 minutes, be able to put it down and come back to it, and not be stuck on a level for 30 plus minutes. I'm looking at you, Drake and Josh the game. But there's a good amount of power-ups and currency to collect as well, and you'll see the main currency, golden clams, absolutely everywhere. And a little side note here, don't you just want to eat those clams? My God, when I was a kid, I remember thinking those clams looked so tasty, man. I wanted to eat them so goddamn bad. But you can use these to purchase extra lives and power-ups in the shop in between levels. So the currency does have a use. It's not just to, see how much you can collect. There's not too much you can buy with them, but them having the shop in there, I think that's pretty nice, as it, kind of gives you a reason to go out of your way to collect those extra golden clams. You'll find mustaches throughout the levels as well, and they just grant you invincibility for a short amount of time. And I'm really glad that they decided to use mustaches for this. I think it's such a good callback to the movie, and I'm just really glad that they showed a little bit of an attention to detail. That's just really nice. You can collect chum buckets as well, and those allow SpongeBob to use his special move, which clears the entire screen of enemies. And finally, the ice cream sundaes give you an extra life. So having all these power-ups and currency to collect, it gives the game a little bit more substance and gives you something else to work towards, which I do really appreciate, because they could have just not included the currency system, not included the shop. It would have been a lot easier for them. But it's nice having that in there. It just gives you, like I said, a reason to go out of your way to collect those clams and stuff like that. It's pretty good. Not all the levels are the same, though. There are driving levels in between each world, which I thought were so much fun as a kid. They help break up the game a little bit, and it's just something new and different. At the end of each world, there is a boss battle, and there's not too much variation when it comes to those. It's pretty much you just jump on their head 3 times, and that's about it. Except for this guy. He's a freak, man. Look at him. He's enjoying that just way too much. But yeah, like I said, there's nothing really groundbreaking here. I mean, the story is the same as the movie. It follows it beat for beat, so if you've seen that, you know the story. But it's just pretty solid gameplay. Obviously, compared to the console version, it's not quite as polished or as robust as that is. But I'm just really grateful that this game released on handheld so that 6-year-old me could experience, a fun SpongeBob game. Growing up, SpongeBob was a huge part of my childhood, as I'm sure it was a huge part of yours. So having it on a platform that I was able to experience was absolutely incredible. But if you made it this far and you enjoyed the video, consider checking out some of my other ones. There might be some stuff there that you'll enjoy as well. I appreciate you guys watching this far, and we'll see you next time. Take care.